This is explosive. All the affidavits that the Mormon Church has been relying on to prove that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy are forged documents, and they are forged on their face. Forged polygamy documents, affidavits of Joseph Smith's plural wives, do not exist. Read that again. 200 years of claiming Smith practiced polygamy are based on affidavits that don't exist in reality. There are no originals, no signed plural wife affidavits done under court seal. They are simply figments of the imagination and Mormon scholars' strange footnotes. The plural wife affidavits were kept, and if you pull up the documents referenced by Brian Hales, they are typewritten. No, they're not typewritten. They are done on a word processor. These documents and affidavits are not originals, are not copies of originals, are not found any place where they're supposed to have been found, which is only reference to them is in the Deseret News. Nobody has ever seen the original documents. So I must admit I'm a little bit irritated that I, as an attorney who have a full-time career and is not a historical scholar, but only started on my own Mormon history genealogical research 2 to 3 years ago when I discovered some strange anomalies in my own history. That led me to start researching Mormon history itself, because for some reason my genealogy was completely confused and mixed up and did not make any sense, especially in light of the strange Mormon history that I suddenly became aware of was based on total fiction. So I just want to say, why am I the only one doing this? Well, there are some very good scholars describing the fact that there is no reliable historical evidence that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. But then we have all these Brighamite Utah Mormon scholars, ex-Mormon scholars, all purporting to rely on lies and refusing to acknowledge the truth of the actual situation. They use phony footnotes, they use phony documents, they buy up Mark Hoffman's forged documents. They are probably the worst of the worst as far as I'm concerned, because my career is based on truth finding, not on making up the truth, because sometimes people's lives depend on truth, and sometimes people's spiritual well-being depends on truth. And when a whole entire organization is based on 200 years of false history, this needs to be corrected. In fact, I think some people need to be prosecuted for the promotion of absolute lies. I'm not saying Brian Hales is the only one responsible, but he's certainly the spokesperson, and he knows his footnotes are phony. And if he doesn't, he's done a good job in trying to hide them and conceal them. And when somebody is concealing the actual footnotes, that is evidence of a guilty mind. So whether or not Brian Hales intentionally or unintentionally, or maybe he's in some kind of hypnotic spiritual trance, but all his footnotes are deceitful and phony and lead you into Alice in Wonderland looking glass, Orwellian, dystopic non-history. It is a history I've been robbed of, you've been robbed of. If you come from the Mormon background, we all have been robbed of our actual history, which, if you want to look at it, Joseph Smith was a Western hero who fought against slavery and was one of the most well-respected anti-slavery settlers and religious leaders of his day, in which such luminaries as Abraham Lincoln looked up to. So let's get into my most recent discovery, which has got me a little bit, I shall say, a little bit irritated. So I'm looking at Joseph Smith's polygamy website done by Brian Hales under Sarah Ann Whitney. And the only problematic issue is this affidavit that all scholars refer to in stating that Sarah Ann Whitney was married to Joseph Smith in secret on July 27th, 1842. Be remembered that on the 19th day of June, 1869, personally appeared before me Elias Smith, probate judge for said county, Sarah Ann Kimball, who was by me sworn in due form and law upon her oath, said that on the 27th day of July, 1842, at the city of Nauvoo, county of Hancock, state of Illinois, she was married or sealed to Joseph Smith personally, to Joseph Smith, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It would have been more accurate to say co-president of the church, because Hiram Smith was also a co-president at the time. President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, by Newell K. Whitney, her father, presiding bishop of said church, according to the laws of the same, regulating marriage in the presence of Elizabeth Ann Whitney, her mother. Now, of course, Elizabeth Ann Whitney, in her autobiography, purportedly published in The Exponent about 10 years after this, in 1879, did not remember this date of 1842. The timeline is completely off. Elizabeth Ann Whitney only remembered that her daughter was married to Joseph Smith after the polygamy revelation in 1843, and after she remembered that her son-in-law Kingsbury had made a copy of the revelation after Emma Smith burned it. And again, these marriages were sealed and then burned in what you call a very traditional occultic ritual called sigil magic. In other words, you put the blessing or the sigil on a piece of paper, and then to seal it into heaven, you burn it. So whenever they refer to Joseph Smith asking all his marriage partners to burn his proposals of marriage, it is a reference to the traditional occultic, or you can call it a satanic ritual or a witchcraft ritual of sigil sealing magic. And that's where this whole sealing ritual comes from, occultic, satanic, traditional magic. But let's go forward here. So here is the affidavit, which conflicts with Elizabeth Ann Whitney's memory 10 years later. I don't know why she wouldn't remember going in and having an affidavit done, because she also did an affidavit, but it's not referenced here. But let's see what Mr. Hales uses as his footnote. He uses that these affidavits are contained in Joseph F. Smith's affidavit book's reference. But of course, he doesn't put the actual link, so he makes it very difficult. So the way I did it was I went to Google and I copied this string, and I was pulled up to these Mormon polygamy documents. And so here we've got Joseph Fielding Smith affidavit book, volume 4, transcript. All right, LDS Church History. Now this is what you're going to find when you go into the historical archive. You're not going to find actual affidavits. What you're going to find are not source documents. You're going to find a word processing copy of purported affidavits, no source documents. All these polygamous affidavits are basically 1973 word processed documents, and they were word processed, I believe, off of the publication that was partially publicized in the Deseret News in about 1905. It's called Blood Atonement and Polygamy, and it was a series of letters between Joseph Fielding Smith and Mr. Evans of the Reorganized Church, in which Mr. Evans was claiming Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy, and Joseph Fielding Smith, the nephew or Hiram Smith's son, was saying unequivocally that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy. Well, he wouldn't have no personal knowledge of it because he was 4 or 5 or 6 when his father Hiram was murdered. He would not know of any secret practice of polygamy in Nauvoo. He would only know it by what people told him, like Heber C. Kimball, who started the whole fandangled secret marriage issues in Nauvoo, the Cochranites from the Cochranite free-loving, wife-swapping communities, and that's what it was. It wasn't polygamy, it wasn't polyandry, it was free-loving, wife-swapping community of underground Mormonism that Joseph Smith was trying to get rid of. Well, anyway, so here we've got, let's see, here's an affidavit. It purports to be an affidavit, yes, same kind of SS This is just a nouveau thing. There's no seal here. There's no original signature. There's nothing. These are not source documents. They would never be allowed in court. Again, here's another one. Be it remembered on the 1st day of May, AD 1869, before Elias Smith. Elias Smith is a cousin to the Smith family. In said county personally appeared Diantha Huntington. There's the Huntington affidavit. It's not an affidavit. It's a word processing document. You can't find the original. Here's Presidia Lathran Huntington Kimball. I mean, if these are the only affidavits they are referring to, these are not source documents. In other words, where are the source documents? Where are the photographic copies of the actual documents? Yes, the actual documents could be in the church archives. And if you go up here, these are duplicates of the similarly titled record book found in a folder 5 in the affidavits on celestial marriage. This is all they have as far as affidavits. These are not legal documents. These are not self-authentic documents. These are not church documents. These are word-processed copies of something, and they were copied from Joseph Fielding Smith's exchange of letters between Mr. Evans and himself. And the only actual copies we have are in 1905, Joseph Fielding Smith saying he had these affidavits by these women. Well, he didn't, because they don't have a copy of them. And Joseph Fielding at Smith in 1905 is referring to the fact he had copies of these actual affidavits. He did not. These are just word processed copies of what probably Joseph Fielding Smith created on his own. And the Mormon Church is not beyond forging their own documents. But my goodness, at least there should be some convincing forgeries than just a duplicate copy of folders with word processed documents in them. So if any historians or scholars can locate the original copies with original signatures, original legal documents called affidavits, please let me know. I could be jumping the gun here, but as far as what I see at this point in time, the entire Mormon scholarship is depending on documents that don't exist. They've just made them up. And Brian Hales himself, there's a reason why he doesn't point to these actual documents, because they don't exist in original. These are just the imaginations of Joseph Fielding Smith while he was trying to convince Mr. Evans in that book now called Blood Atonement and Polygamy, trying to convince the reorganized church that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. Well, again, Joseph Fielding Smith wasn't around at the time. He wouldn't know personally. And as far as we can see, there's no original affidavit signed by any of these quote-unquote purported polygamous wives. Where are they? Okay. So as we can see, once again, the Utah Mormon Church, either intentionally or unintentionally, has perpetrated a fraud on the public. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but it was done in 1973 and revised in 1982. Well, Mr. Marquardt also refers to Sarah and Whitney's affidavit. And let's see what he uses as his source document for the Sarah and Whitney claim that she married Joseph Smith in 1842, July 27th. So we're going to go on down and find it. So I want to show you where Brian Hales in his essays almost uses or plagiarizes Michael Marquardt's article here. And Smith, when she was 17 on July 27, 1842, Joseph Smith had first seen Sarah and Whitney when she arrived in Kirtland, Ohio, about the 1st of February, 1831. She was almost 6 years old. Now, do you see how they set up the reader to, well, Joseph Smith wasn't only attracted to post-pubescent girls or teenagers. He eyed them as young as 6 years old. And then 11 years, in other words, prepping them, grooming them. And as I will show you in John D. Lee's autobiography, he married that moved in, and he raised since she was 6 years old, and then married her, because if you eye them at 6 years old, you're grooming them for 11 years later to be married to them. This is what they're implying, or they're subtly planting in your consciousness, that Joseph Smith was a pedophile. All right, so let's look down here. He also quotes the affidavit of Sarah A. Kimball, and it's copied verbatim of what I just read you. So let's see what he uses as a footnote. Okay, I want you to see I'm using this footnote to reference where he got this affidavit from. Joseph Fielding Smith, Blood Atonement and the Origin of Plural Marriage, Salt Lake City, Utah, the Deseret News Press, page 73. He does not use any actual source documents. He is quoting simply from a copy of the book, Blood Atonement and Origin of Plural Marriage, in which Joseph Fielding Smith makes reference to this affidavit of Sarah and Whitney, but there's no source document. And this was in 1905, so certainly the church would have the source document. If they ever existed, no, they never existed. It's just that Joseph Fielding Smith wrote them down as, but all these affidavits of these plural wives don't exist. They exist in the imagination of Joseph Fielding Smith and were put in Blood Atonement and the Origin of Plural Marriage, but there are no source documents. And Brian Hales, Michael Quinn, all of the Mormon scholars have just been repeating and perpetrating a fraud on the public, whether intentionally or unintentionally. None of these affidavits exist in actuality. This has all been a 200-year lie.